When a powerful billionaire defied his family and married the woman he loved, he thought love alone could conquer all. But betrayal, prejudice, and a bitter feud pushed their bond to the edge. Years later, the tables have turned, and the family that once scorned them faces a devastating fall. What happens next will leave you speechless. The ballroom shimmered with gilded chandeliers, dripping with crystals that reflected the golden light. A faint melody of a live jazz band blended with the clinking of champagne glasses and the murmurs of New York's elite. This was the Founders' annual charity gala, an event touted as the pinnacle of wealth and influence, where the powerful gathered under the guise of philanthropy. Alexander Monroe, the heir to Monroe Holdings, stood at the center of it all, dressed in an immaculate black tuxedo, his hand effortlessly curled around a glass of expensive champagne. Tall, broad-shouldered, and chiseled with the arrogance of old money, Alex exuded the kind of charisma that both inspired admiration and provoked jealousy. He listened half-heartedly as an aging CEO recounted a golf trip, nodding politely, but scanning the crowd with sharp blue eyes that revealed his restlessness. The Monroe name carried weight. It was synonymous with power, power that Alex had spent his life carrying on his shoulders. As the only son of Robert Monroe Sr., expectations pressed on him like a vice. Build the empire, expand the name, control the room. These lessons, drilled into him since childhood, left little space for him to do anything else. "Alexander!" a voice called from across the room. Catherine, his mother, approached with a surgically perfected smile and a hovering sense of judgment. "Don't just stand there. Why don't you introduce yourself to the guests from the Wilkerson Foundation? We need to keep them happy." "Yes, Mother," Alex muttered with the kind of obedience that came out of habit rather than desire. Then he saw her. Near the far corner of the ballroom stood Amina Caldwell. Her dress, an elegant emerald green satin gown, flowed around her like liquid, her glowing brown skin illuminated under the soft lights. She wasn't trying to blend in. She stood tall, her afro styled like a crown, her demeanor regal and defiant. She wasn't laughing politely at bad jokes, wasn't angling herself toward the most powerful man in the room. She was simply there, watching, listening, unafraid to exist. Before we dive into this gripping tale of courage and justice, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this shocking story, don't forget to subscribe. Alex found himself staring, which didn't happen often. "Who's that?" he asked, more to himself than anyone. "Stay away," a colleague warned. "That's Amina Caldwell, a lawyer, an activist type. She runs a nonprofit that challenges companies on labor rights and discrimination. Not exactly the kind of woman who'll cozy up to a Monroe." Alex smirked. "Is that so?" Without another word, he began making his way toward her. Amina felt him before she saw him. The energy in the room shifted. The kind of quiet shift that happens when someone powerful steps into your orbit. She turned to see Alexander Monroe cutting through the crowd, his gaze fixed on her. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Even when he finally stopped mere inches away, his towering presence casting a shadow over her. "Alexander Monroe," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate, offering a hand. She arched a brow, looking down at his outstretched hand before meeting his gaze. "I know who you are." That threw him for a beat. "Then you have me at a disadvantage. I don't know who you are." "Amina Caldwell." "A pleasure, Amina." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I doubt that." Alex blinked, caught off guard, but his lips curled into a smirk. "Do I look that untrustworthy?" "You look exactly like who you are, a man who thinks he owns the room." "You're quick with the assumptions," Alex retorted, taking a sip of his champagne, intrigued rather than offended. "I thought this was a charity gala. Aren't we all supposed to pretend to play nice?" "I don't pretend for anyone," Amina replied coolly, "especially not for a Monroe." A beat of silence. The tension between them crackled, sharp, palpable, like two swords meeting. Around them, conversations buzzed, waiters passed with trays of hors d'oeuvres, but the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "Ah," Alex finally said, eyes narrowing with interest. "You don't like me." I don't know you, Amina corrected, her tone even. But I know you're kind. I know your family. I know the way men like you wield power as if it's your birthright. Alex let out a low chuckle. I should probably be offended. I'm not trying to offend you, Amina said plainly. I'm telling you the truth. You're quite the idealist, he countered, his smile sharp. I bet you think standing here looking down your nose at me makes you the moral center of the universe. Amina's eyes flashed with fire. You think throwing money at a cause gives you the moral high ground? At least I'm doing something, Alex shot back. How many people talk about change without lifting a finger? Intent matters, Amina replied, unflinching. Change doesn't come with checks, it comes with courage. Something in her words hit Alex harder than he'd expected, cutting through his polished exterior. He opened his mouth to respond, but a waiter interrupted, offering her a glass of champagne. She politely declined and excused herself, her exit leaving Alex standing alone for the first time that night. He watched her walk away, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Irritation, curiosity, admiration, all tangled together. She's interesting, he thought, though the word hardly did justice to the storm she'd stirred within him. As the night wound down, Alex couldn't stop thinking about Amina Caldwell. He'd encountered countless women at these events, women who laughed too loudly at his jokes, who angled themselves toward him as if proximity alone could lift their social standing. But Amina? It was as if she didn't care about his name, his wealth, or the fact that he'd been groomed as a prince among men. She treated him like a man, one with flaws, arrogance, and little else. From across the ballroom, Amina noticed him watching her. A flicker of a smile tugged at her lips. He's still staring. Typical, she thought to herself. But even as she left the gala, her thoughts lingered on him longer than she would admit. Alexander Monroe wasn't what she expected. Underneath his arrogance, there had been a flicker of something real. Amina shook it off. She didn't have time for men like Alexander Monroe. Alexander Monroe wasn't the kind of man accustomed to being ignored, let alone dismissed, but Amina Caldwell had done both with stunning precision. After their encounter at the gala, Alex had searched for her in the days that followed. Through the whispers of society insiders and a quick briefing from his assistant, he found out more. Amina was a Harvard-educated civil rights lawyer, the founder of a nonprofit dedicated to labor reform, and a woman who had made enemies in all the right circles. He'd expected her to be impressed when he called her office for lunch. Instead, he was met with a response that left him flustered and oddly amused. Mr. Monroe, my schedule is booked solid, and even if it weren't, I'd still say no. So he called again, and again. The first time Amina agreed to meet him, she set the terms. 1 hour, in public. And don't think you're buying my time, split the bill, Monroe. They met at a boutique coffee shop in Brooklyn, a far cry from the penthouses and marble floors Alex was used to. He arrived 5 minutes early, uncomfortable in his custom-tailored suit. When Amina walked in, casual in jeans, a leather jacket, and minimal makeup, Alex nearly forgot how to form words. She looked at him, took in the suit and the faintly confused expression, and smirked. Didn't realize you owned clothes that weren't tuxedos. I dress for the occasion, Alex quipped, recovering quickly. But I see you're comfortable. Always, Amina replied, settling into the seat opposite him. They ordered, black coffee for her, some fancy-sounding latte for him. What is it you want, Alex? She asked, cutting to the chase. He leaned back, studying her. I want to know more about you. Is that so hard to believe? Yes, Amina replied without hesitation. Men like you don't chase women like me without an angle. I'm not interested in being a headline. Then don't read the papers. That's cute, she said dryly, stirring her coffee. You think this is a game, but you and I come from two very different worlds. I fight against the very systems that make your family powerful. I'm not my family, Alex said softly. Amina raised an eyebrow. That's convenient to say. For a moment, Alex was quiet, caught between her gaze and the hard truth of her words. You're right, he admitted. My family's empire isn't clean. It's built on privilege, on systems that were unfair before I was even born. But that doesn't mean I can't change things. She considered him carefully, folding her arms. Why do you care what I think? Because you're the first person to see through all this, Alex gestured at himself, and not be impressed. Her lips twitched into a smile despite herself. You don't know me, Alex. No, but I'd like to. The 1 hour stretched into 3. They debated everything from politics to philanthropy to the ridiculous price of designer handbags. Alex listened more than he spoke, another rarity, and found himself both challenged and fascinated. Amina, for her part, saw glimpses of something unexpected in him. Vulnerability, hidden beneath layers of polish. A man questioning his place in the world he'd inherited. When they left the cafe, Amina turned to him and stared. You're stubborn, Monroe, I'll give you that. And you're impossible, Caldwell, he replied with a grin. But I'll see you again. She rolled her eyes. Don't count on it. But Alex did. Over the following weeks, their paths intertwined. Alex showed up to one of Amina's nonprofit events unannounced, catching her completely off guard as he sat among other donors, silent and attentive. Afterward, he cornered her with a playful smile. See, I'm not just throwing money, I'm showing up. You're trying to impress me, she accused. Is it working? No, she said, turning to leave. But she smiled when he couldn't see. Slowly, Amina let her walls crack. Alex wasn't like she'd imagined. He didn't just speak about change. He began asking questions about it. He used his wealth to quietly fund causes that mattered to her, without asking for credit. He listened when she vented about corporate greed and systemic injustice. And he made her laugh, something she hadn't realized she missed. One night after attending a legal forum together, Alex drove her home. They sat parked outside her brownstone, the streetlights flickering faintly. You're different, Alex, Amina said softly. Good different? She turned to face him. Complicated different. He smiled, reaching for her hand. I can live with that. For the first time, she didn't pull away. As days passed, they continued to spend time together. Alex tried all he could to preserve their peaceful and private moments with each other. But it was inevitable. He knew the press would find out soon and have a field day with the stories. His fears were confirmed the next morning when he woke up to multiple notifications on his phone. The headlines read, Alexander Monroe's mystery girlfriend, activist or gold digger? Social media buzzed with debates. Some praised the relationship as a sign of progress. Others attacked Amina, calling her opportunistic. Reporters hounded her at work. One morning, she walked into her office to find a magazine featuring her face under a bold, disrespectful headline. She slammed it on her desk, furious. This is exactly why I didn't want this. Alex called her that afternoon. Ignore them, Amina. That's easy for you to say, she snapped. They don't question your worth every time you walk into a room. Then let's change the conversation. How? We'll figure it out together, he said simply. Amina hoped that Alex's family would be welcoming, but all her wishes crashed when she found out the Monroes were even more hostile about their relationship. At a family dinner in their sprawling Connecticut estate, Catherine Monroe cut straight to the point. This relationship of yours, Alexander, it needs to stop. Excuse me? Her, she sneered, as if the word itself was distasteful. She's a distraction. She's nothing like us, like you. People are talking, and not kindly. Robert Monroe Sr., stone-faced at the head of the table, added, People like her don't belong in our world. Alex's fists clenched under the table. People like her? Don't play the fool, Robert Sr. said coldly. She will ruin you. Marry her, and you'll regret it. The words echoed like a shot fired into a quiet room. Alex stood, pushing back his chair. If you can't accept her, you don't deserve to know me. Catherine gasped, and Robert's face darkened with fury. Watch yourself, Alexander, his father warned. Love is blind, but life isn't. Alex turned and walked out, his resolve unshaken. That night, he knocked on Amina's door. When she opened it, he looked at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. I'm done hiding us, Alex said softly. She hesitated. Alex, I don't care what they say. I don't care what they think. I choose you, Amina. Every time. Her walls finally crumbled. Then stop talking and come inside, she whispered. And as the door closed behind them, the world outside no longer mattered. The world held its breath on the day Alexander Monroe and Amina Caldwell exchanged vows. The venue was something out of a dream, an expansive garden estate on the outskirts of New York City, adorned with cascading white and gold roses intertwined with lush greenery. Warm sunlight streamed through an early summer sky as guests gathered, the murmurs of anticipation mingling with the soft hum of classical strings. This was no ordinary wedding. The Monroe name had ensured that. Every major news outlet covered the event, buzzing with equal parts intrigue and scandal. Monroe marries black activist lawyer, fairy tale or folly. The headlines practically wrote themselves. The societal elite whispered about the union. Some called it groundbreaking. Others muttered words like rebellion, mistake, or even a phase. Yet, amidst the noise, the bride and groom stood tall, defiant in their love. Amina was radiant. Her dress, a custom ivory gown embroidered with gold accents, was a blend of African and Western designs. A regal jewel, head wrap, sat atop her perfectly styled curls, a nod to her Nigerian heritage, and the intricate henna designs on her hands whispered of tradition and timeless beauty. Her mother, Evelyn Caldwell, dabbed her tears as she watched her daughter prepare. "You look like a queen," Evelyn said softly, her voice trembling with pride. Amina smiled at her reflection, nervous but determined. "Thank you, Mama." Her bridesmaids, friends from law school and childhood, adjusted her train and joked lightly to calm her nerves. Yet beneath the laughter, Amina felt the weight of the moment. She was walking into more than a marriage. She was walking into a completely different world. A knock interrupted the brides giggling with her bridesmaids. A courier stood outside with a small envelope addressed to Amina Caldwell. "What's that?" her maid of honor asked. "I don't know," Amina muttered, opening it slowly. Inside, a pristine white card held a single message, written in elegant cursive. "Walk away now, for both your sakes. This marriage won't survive." There was no signature, but Amina knew. Catherine Monroe. A chill ran through her, but she folded the card calmly and tucked it into her purse. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of being scared or angry on her big day. Meanwhile, Alex prepared in silence. Unlike the warmth of Amina's suite, his dressing room felt cold. His best man, an old college friend, patted him on the back. "Nervous?" "No," Alex replied simply, his blue eyes calm but sharp. His father, Robert Monroe Sr., and mother Catherine were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't accepted the invitation. Their absence hung in the air like a specter, and Alex felt it, the silence of his family's disapproval gnawing at him. But when he thought of Amina, her laugh, her fire, her strength, his resolve was stronger than ever. "Ready?" the officiant asked, stepping into the room. Alex nodded. "Let's do this." The ceremony was breathtaking. Amina walked down the aisle on her father's arm, the crowd gasping at her beauty. Alex waited at the altar, his breath catching as he saw her. In that moment, there were no whispers, no headlines, just the woman he loved, radiant and fierce, walking toward him. When she reached him, Alex took her hands. "You're stunning," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And you're lucky," she replied, smirking through happy tears. The ceremony blended cultures seamlessly. Amina's father performed a traditional blessing, while a close family friend officiated the vows. They exchanged rings, hers simple yet elegant, his custom engraved with the words, "You and me always." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alex leaned down, pressing his forehead against Amina's before kissing her softly. Cheers erupted around them, drowning out everything else. But in the back of Amina's mind, the letter lingered like a shadow. The reception was a chaotic and fun affair. Amina's family filled the space with joy, dancing, singing, and speeches that echoed love and laughter. Her father toasted, his voice booming. "To my daughter, who has always walked her own path, and to Alex, who was brave enough to follow her. Laughter and applause erupted, and Alex grinned, raising his glass. Amina's friends told embarrassing stories, reminiscing about late-night study sessions and dreams of changing the world. Her mother danced with her, tears streaming freely down her face. In contrast, the few Monroe family acquaintances who attended sat stiff and awkward, their smiles frozen, as if unsure how to exist in a space filled with unfiltered joy. Alex noticed, but he didn't care. He pulled Amina onto the dance floor, spinning her gently as the music slowed. She looked up at him, her brown eyes searching his. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Perfect," he replied. "You're not thinking about them?" "I'm thinking about you," he said, brushing his lips against her forehead. "You and me, Amina. Nothing else matters." Later that evening, after the guests had gone, the newlyweds retreated to a private suite. Amina sat on the edge of the bed, her dress pooling around her, her face pensive. Alex joined her, sitting close and taking her hand. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, then pulled the letter from her purse, handing it to him. Alex's expression darkened as he read it. "Catherine," he muttered, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want to ruin today," Amina said softly. "But..." "Don't," Alex interrupted, turning to face her. "They don't get to ruin anything. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." "They won't stop, Alex." "Neither will I," he said firmly. "Amina, I chose you. I'll choose you every day, no matter what." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's you and me against the world, isn't it?" He cupped her face gently, brushing his thumb along her cheek. "It's you and me, always." He kissed her softly, tender, unhurried, as if sealing a vow no one else could touch. Outside the suite, the world kept turning. The whispers grew louder. The Monroes couldn't believe Alex had defied the and everything they stood for. In the darkness of the Monroe estate, Catherine sat by a fireplace, her lips pursed in a thin line. "He actually did it, Robert. He went and married that black girl that's below his station. She must have turned him against us," Catherine spiraled. Robert Sr. sipped his whiskey, his expression stony and calm. "He'll come crawling back," Robert muttered. "When it falls apart, he'll have no choice." Catherine stared into the flames. "And we'll be waiting." The years had not been easy, but they had been theirs. For Alexander and Amina Monroe, love had been a shield, a fortress against the world that seemed determined to break them. After their wedding, Alex did what no Monroe before him had dared. He walked away from the family empire. He resigned from Monroe Holdings and relinquished his position as heir. "I'll make my own name," he had told Amina one night. "I don't need their heritage or the billionaire title if it means I'm indirectly tied to them." Alex poured his energy into building his own investment firm from scratch. Amina, now a rising star in the world of civil rights law, threw herself into her work, taking on high-profile cases that challenged corrupt corporations and fought for the marginalized. Together, they became a power couple of a different kind, modern, purposeful, and deeply in love. But outside their bubble, the Monroes seethed. They had not expected the marriage to have lasted a year, and this was Alex and Amina's 5th anniversary. The Monroe family didn't forgive easily, and they certainly didn't forget. Catherine and Robert Monroe Sr. made their displeasure known quietly but ruthlessly. Under their influence, old business allies distanced themselves from Alex. Contracts vanished overnight. Banks rescinded loans. Whispers spread like wildfire. Alex Monroe's business is a sinking ship. The wife's poor cousins and family history, dragging him down. The media, ever eager for scandal, fueled the narrative. Headlines slashed at their reputations like knives. The price of love, Alex Monroe's downfall. Activist wife to blame for Monroe heir's business collapse? Amina, already accustomed to scrutiny, bore it better than Alex did. She focused on her work, but the anonymous hate mail and threats crept in like poison. Letters with slurs scrawled in crude handwriting. Voicemails muttering things too vile to repeat. One night, As Amina locked her office door, she found a note taped to the glass. Go back to where you came from before you ruin him completely. She stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding, before tearing the note in half and walking out. Alex, meanwhile, began to feel the cracks. Late nights spent staring at balance sheets. Days spent on the phone trying to reassure jittery investors. His small, promising empire was shaking precariously, weighed down by sabotage and whispers that he couldn't control. One evening, he returned home to find Amina cooking dinner, humming softly to herself in the kitchen. He paused, watching her, exhaustion etched into his face. Something smells good, he said, trying to cheer up as he loosened his tie. Amina turned, her smile softening as she studied him. You look tired. I'm fine. Alex. He sighed and leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. It's falling apart, Mina. I can't get ahead of it. Every time I take a step forward, someone's there to push me back. Amina put down the spoon and walked to him, sliding her arms around his waist. You're not alone in this. We'll get through it together. He kissed the top of her head, holding her tightly. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do, she murmured. And I'll remind you of that every day. Meanwhile, Catherine Monroe was hosting a lavish charity gala, an annual event meant to showcase the family's wealth and status. Alex hadn't attended in years, but when an old family friend reached out to extend a seemingly heartfelt invitation, he considered it. It might be a chance to bury the hatchet, Alex said over breakfast. Amina hesitated. Alex, you know what they're like. Maybe it's time, he replied. Maybe they've changed. Her gaze was skeptical, but she trusted him. Then we'll go together. The Monroe's estate was as opulent as ever. Grand marble pillars, glittering chandeliers, and walls lined with generations of portraits. But beneath the grandeur lay something cold and calculating. When Amina entered the ballroom on Alex's arm, the room seemed to freeze for half a second. The air thickened with whispers, judgmental eyes turning toward her. She held her head high, her gown a deep royal blue that made her look every inch a queen. Alex squeezed her hand reassuringly as they moved through the crowd. But Catherine Monroe, draped in an icy silver gown, had been waiting. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence, Catherine said loudly, her voice dripping with false warmth as Alex and Amina approached. And Amina, always, everywhere. Hello, Catherine, Amina replied coolly. Catherine's smile faltered at the calm confidence in Amina's tone, but she didn't stop. You know, it's a shame, Alexander. You had so much potential. It must be difficult for you, watching everything you built crumble. Alex's expression darkened. What are you talking about? Oh, darling, the whole city knows. Monroe in name only, isn't that what they say now? All because you let yourself get distracted. The words hung in the air like smoke. Conversations stilled around them, guests straining to hear. Amina stiffened, her fingers digging into Alex's hand. Catherine's gaze shifted pointedly to Amina. It's just sad to see how far you've fallen. Some women build men up. Others, well, she shrugged delicately. They ruin them. A hush settled over the room. Amina started to turn away, her composure flawless, but Alex exploded. Stop it, mother! His voice rang out, sharp and furious. The room froze. Catherine blinked, feigning innocence. Alexander, there's no need to cause a scene. You think this is about her? Alex's voice shook with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. You hate her because she's everything you're not. Brave, kind, and honest. She's done more good in 1 year than you have in your entire life. Careful, son, came Robert Sr.'s voice from nearby, low and threatening. You're embarrassing yourself. No, you're embarrassing yourselves, Alex snapped. His face was red with fury, his voice echoing across the hall. You're so consumed with your money and your name that you can't see past your own arrogance. I love her. She's not the problem. You are. Robert's voice turned cold, almost mocking. And what has that love cost you, Alexander? Your business? Your pride? Marry a woman like that, and you'll lose everything. I told you before, life isn't blind. Alex glared at his father, his voice steady despite the tremor of rage. You're wrong. Life is blind. Blind to color, to status, to privilege. What matters is love, and you wouldn't know it if it stood in front of you. Come on, Mina, Alex muttered, taking Amina's hand and walking away. The crowd parted for them like water. Amina's face was calm, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears as they stepped out into the cool night air. In the car ride home, Alex stared straight ahead, his voice quiet. I'm done with them. Amina reached for his hand. He turned to look at her, the fire in his eyes replaced with something softer. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I knew what I was walking into, she said gently, but I also know we're stronger than this. He nodded, squeezing her hand. We'll be fine. We'll rebuild everything they took. Together, they drove into the night, leaving the Monroes and their legacy of cruelty behind. It began quietly, as all great betrayals do. Alex had spent years building Monroe Vanguard, his flagship investment firm, from the ground up. It wasn't a global empire like his father's, but it was his. Clients trusted him, not because of his name, but because of his vision. But trust was fragile, and betrayal, once planted, spread like rot. One morning, Alex sat in his office reviewing numbers that didn't add up. Contracts were slipping through his fingers. Major investors were suddenly pulling out, citing vague concerns about instability and leadership direction. Calls went unanswered. Emails bounced back with icy formality. Something's wrong, he said to his COO, frowning at the balance sheets. Within days, it unraveled. Alex burst into a board meeting where his largest investor sat alongside his legal team. The air crackled with discomfort as heads turned toward him. Bill, what the hell is going on? Alex demanded. Bill, a longtime ally, avoided his gaze. I'm sorry, Alex. The investors voted to withdraw funding. The firm is underperforming. Underperforming? Alex's voice rose. We're fine. We're growing. Slowly, but growing. It's not just the numbers. Bill cleared his throat uncomfortably. There's chatter, Alex, about your judgment, about the direction you're taking this firm. What chatter? Alex pressed, his voice low, dangerous. Your father's been talking to the partners. The words struck like a blow to the chest. Alex staggered back, a hollow laugh escaping him. Of course. Robert Monroe strikes again. So what did he promise you? A seat at the table? A bigger piece of his empire? Bill couldn't even look at him. It's over, Alex. I'm sorry. Alex left the room without another word, fury boiling inside him. The media devoured it. Monroe Heirs firm crashes amid financial chaos. Is Alexander Monroe a failed visionary? The headlines were cruel, the op-eds worse. Whispers painted Alex as reckless, foolish, a man undone by his pride and by his controversial black wife. Paparazzi camped outside their modest townhouse, flashes lighting up the windows at all hours. Anonymous messages poured in. She's bad luck, Monroe. Walk away now. Inside, Alex spiraled. He spent long hours pacing the house, phone in hand, making desperate calls to former partners, trying to salvage something, anything. His voice grew hoarse from arguing. His nights grew longer. Amina watched helplessly as the man she loved carried the heavy weight of defeat. The living room was dark, except for the glow of the fireplace. Alex sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders slumped, his face buried in his hands. Amina approached quietly, sitting beside him, placing a gentle hand on his back. Alex, she said softly. He didn't move. I failed. You didn't? Yes, I did, he snapped, his voice sharp, broken. I spent years building something that's gone, Mina. Everything I worked for, everything I tried to prove. She remained calm, her voice steady. What are you trying to prove, Alex? To them? To yourself? He looked at her then, his blue eyes red-rimmed, hollow. That I'm not like him. That I'm not just a Monroe. Amina reached for his face, cradling it in her hands. You're not your father, Alex. You never were. You've spent so long running from his shadow that you forgot. You cast your own light. He exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead to hers. What if I can't fix this? She kissed his brow, her voice a whisper. Then we'll build something new, together. For a long time he held her, the room silent except for the crackle of the fire. The ultimatum. Days later, Alex received a call. Your father wants to see you, his assistant said hesitantly. Alex hesitated, then finally agreed. He met Robert Monroe Sr. in his father's sprawling office, a room that smelled of polished mahogany, power, and old money. Robert sat behind his massive desk, impassive as ever. You look like hell, Robert said by way of greeting. Save it, Alex growled. Robert leaned back, steepling his fingers. You brought this on yourself. I told you that woman would ruin you. Alex's fists tightened at his sides. If you brought me here to insult my wife, I'll leave. No, Robert said, his voice calm but cold. I brought you here to give you a way out. Walk away from her, Alexander. Come back to the family and all will be forgiven. Your position, your future, it's yours for one price. Alex stared at him, stunned into silence. Leave her, Robert repeated, as if it were the simplest request in the world. You think this life you're building matters? She's dragging you into the dirt. Let her go before she destroys you completely. Alex's voice was low, dangerous. Get out of my life. But just as he turned to leave, he heard a soft sound, a sharp inhale. Amina was supposed to be waiting in the car, but there she stood in the doorway, her face unreadable, her hand clutching the frame for support. She had come to find him, to make sure things didn't escalate. Now she stood frozen, the weight of the ultimatum pressing between them. Robert's eyes flicked to Amina, his smile cruel. Ah, I see she's heard it all. Amina's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Alex? Alex turned to her quickly. Mina. She held up a hand, silencing him. Do you need a way out? What? If you want out, say it. Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze was unflinching. I don't need you to save me, Alex. I need you to choose me. Alex looked at her, raw pain etched into his face. There's no me without you, Mina. Her breath hitched, but she stepped forward, taking his hand, as if reclaiming him in front of his father. Robert's expression turned to stone. You're a fool, Alexander. No, Alex said, his voice calm and resolute. I'm free. That night, Amina sat beside Alex on the couch, her hands cradling a cup of tea. The firelight flickered, casting warm shadows across the room. I have something to tell you, she said softly. He looked at her, exhaustion softening into concern. What is it? She reached for his hand, placing it gently on her stomach. I'm pregnant. For a moment, Alex simply stared at her, disbelief and wonder crossing his face. Then his lips parted into a slow, tearful smile. We're having a baby? She nodded, tears glistening in her own eyes. Alex pulled her into his arms, holding her close. We're going to be okay, Mina. I promise you, no matter what. As they sat together in the quiet, the future no longer seemed so uncertain. They were battered but unbroken, and within them, something new, something hopeful, was beginning to grow. After that day, Alex walked out of his father's office, hand in hand with Amina. He felt an unfamiliar weight lift from his shoulders. The Monroe name, with all its power, was a chain that had bound him for years. Now, it was gone. The media continued their feeding frenzy, painting him as the prodigal son who had thrown away his billion-dollar inheritance for love. But in Alex and Amina's home, there was no sense of loss, only determination. We start over, Alex told Amina one morning over coffee. He looked worn but alive, the fire back in his eyes. She arched an eyebrow, cradling her mug. Start what? Something new, something that doesn't carry the Monroe name. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. You've been telling me about the work your nonprofit does, how corporations fail the people they're supposed to serve. What if we built a company that didn't fail them? An investment group, but one with principles, one that gives back. Amina smiled slowly, pride flickering across her face. You're talking about ethical investing. Yes. He ran his hands through his hair, energized. We don't chase numbers or just line pockets. We invest in communities, small businesses, clean energy, labor reforms, real progress. She studied him carefully, then nodded. Then let's do it. The early days were brutal. They rented an office. Alex reached out to old friends, former contacts, anyone who might listen. Most doors slammed in his face. The Monroe name still carried weight, but now it was a stain he couldn't scrub off. Good luck, Alex, an old investor told him coldly. No one's going to trust the man who walked away from a fortune. When Alex came home defeated, Amina held him together. You don't need their trust, she said firmly. You'll earn it from people who matter, people who believe in change. Her unwavering support became his anchor. And while Alex worked on the new firm, Amina continued to fight battles in court. Even through her pregnancy, she took on cases that challenged giants. Your wife is relentless, Alex's new business partner Marcus told him one evening as they strategized over spreadsheets. She's the strongest person I know, Alex replied with a proud smile. They called the company Vanguard Partners, a nod to bold visionaries leading from the front. It started small. Investments in local businesses struggling to find their footing, funding for startups led by women and minorities, and partnerships with nonprofit initiatives. The first year was hard. Money was tight, but every small victory was theirs. An immigrant-owned bakery in Brooklyn saw record sales thanks to Vanguard's help. A small tech startup focused on clean energy got the seed funding it needed. Word spread. Slowly, trust came. At a ribbon-cutting event for a new community center Vanguard funded, Alex stood at the podium. He looked at the smiling faces, children, families, small business owners, and he felt it. This was success. Not the cold, calculating empires his father had built, but something alive, meaningful. Thank you all for believing in us, Alex said, his voice steady, his smile genuine. This is just the beginning. Amina, now visibly pregnant, watched from the crowd, her heart full. Robert Monroe Sr., humiliated by Alex's defiance, continued to undermine him behind the scenes. At one point, an anonymous source leaked false accusations against Vanguard, claiming it was financially unsound and a vanity project. The media pounced. More Monroe chaos, one headline blared. Alex felt the familiar ache of doubt creeping back. He sat in their living room late one night, his hands gripping the sides of his head. What if this isn't enough, Mina? He whispered. What if I fail again? Amina, sitting across from him, looked up from her laptop. You're not failing, Alex. But, no. Her voice was sharp and serious. She walked to him, kneeling in front of his chair. We don't measure success by their rules anymore. Look around you. Look at the people whose lives are changing because of what you've built, because of us. He stared at her, his hands reaching to touch her face. How do you always know what to say? Because I know you, she said softly, and I believe in you, even when you don't. Months later, Vanguard Partners wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The company became a leader in ethical investing and community-based development. Major publications that once sneered now called Alex and Amina visionaries of modern business. Their success story spread across headlines. The new Monroe legacy, progress, innovation, and equality. The couple became sought-after voices for change. Amina, now balancing motherhood and her law career, was honored for her advocacy and influence. Alex was celebrated as a businessman who prioritized people over profit. Together, they had rewritten the rules. At a gala held in their honor, the atmosphere buzzed with admiration. Leaders, activists, and business innovators mingled in a space charged with optimism and progress. Amina wore an elegant gold gown, her smile radiant as she held Alex's hand. Cameras flashed, but for once, the attention wasn't hostile. Marcus raised a toast. To Alex and Amina Monroe, proof that strength, love, and vision can change the world. The crowd erupted into applause. As they danced later that evening, Alex leaned down and whispered, You were right, you know. Amina tilted her head up, amused. About what? About us. About what we could build. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. We've only just begun. Meanwhile, Robert Monroe Sr. sat in his sprawling empty estate, watching news coverage of the gala. His face was unreadable as the screen showed his son shaking hands with world leaders and Amina giving a passionate speech about justice and equality. For the first time in his life, Robert looked small, out of touch, out of time. Catherine, seated next to him, said softly, "We were wrong, Robert." He didn't respond. He just stared ahead. Years of struggle had forged Alex and Amina into something unbreakable. Where others saw failure, they had found purpose. Where others threw stones, they had built a foundation. As they left the gala, Alex looked at Amina, their 2 children waiting for them at home, and smiled. "We did it," he said. Amina looked up at him, pride shining in her eyes. "No, Alex, we're doing it." Together they walked into the car packed outside, content to know that they were building a legacy far greater than money or power. A legacy of love, resilience, and hope. For decades, Robert Monroe Sr. had built the Monroe name into an unquestioned and unchallenged force. Monroe Holdings owned buildings that scraped the skies, companies that powered industries, and alliances that shaped entire economies. But in Robert's relentless pursuit of power, he had planted the seeds of his own destruction. It began with whispers, small tremors that no one noticed at first. Monroe Holdings faced accusations of fraud and unethical business practices. Employees came forward with stories of harassment and mistreatment. Competitors found old deals laced with corruption, and journalists started asking questions. When the lawsuits hit, they hit hard. The New York Times headline broke the news to the world. The Monroe Empire in crisis, lawsuits, scandal, and corruption. Inside his sprawling Manhattan office, Robert Monroe Sr. sat at his desk, gripping a crumpled newspaper in his fists. "Fix it!" he barked at his lawyers. "I don't care how, just fix it!" But there was no fixing it. The lawsuits multiplied, investors fled, and board members, once loyal, turned against him to save themselves. News anchors gleefully detailed Monroe Holdings' collapse, night after night, their tone almost poetic as they recounted how the mighty had fallen. Decades of ruthless leadership have finally caught up to the Monroe family, one commentator noted. While Robert raged in his office, Catherine Monroe withdrew into silence. She stopped attending society events, her name no longer welcomed in the circles she once ruled. Former friends stopped calling. Her invitations went unanswered. One afternoon, she sat alone in the huge estate, the air heavy with loneliness. Framed portraits of past Monroes lined the walls, men and women who had built their fortune generation by generation, their eyes stern, unflinching. Catherine looked away from them, feeling their silent judgment. On the television, a news segment played, showcasing Alex and Amina Monroe at yet another awards ceremony. Alex stood tall, his arm around Amina as she delivered a moving speech about justice and innovation. "She's remarkable," the reporter gushed. "Together, the modern Monroes, as they were now dubbed, have created a new kind of empire, one built on trust, equity, and compassion." Catherine watched, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. She turned off the television abruptly, as though she could silence the truth. But even in the quiet, the realization crept in like a shadow. She was wrong. They had been wrong about everything. Robert Monroe Sr.'s stubborn pride carried him far, but not far enough. Monroe Holdings was sold off in pieces, its assets liquidated to settle debts. Friends abandoned him, shareholders sued him, and the media portrayed him as a relic of a bygone era, an emperor left to rule over ruins. The Monroe estate grew quiet. Catherine retreated further into herself, and Robert became a man haunted by memories of the empire he had once commanded. One evening, sitting alone in his study, he turned on the television. There they were again, Alex and Amina. The broadcast showed Alex standing before a packed auditorium, a sleek Vanguard Partners banner behind him. Beside him, Amina smiled warmly as their children clapped from the front row. The camera zoomed in on a plaque honoring their work, Pioneers of Ethical Leadership. Robert stared at the screen, seeing his son not as a failure, but as a man who had surpassed him, a man who had built something greater than wealth, something lasting. And Amina, she was everything Robert had refused to see, poised, brilliant, and unshakable. The camera caught Alex leaning down to kiss her on the cheek as the crowd roared with applause. For the first time in his life, Robert felt something unfamiliar gnawing at him: regret. On a gray, drizzling afternoon, Alex answered the door to a sight he never thought he'd see. Robert Monroe Sr., standing on his front step, his shoulders slightly hunched, his expensive coat soaked with rain. "Dad?" Alex said, surprised, his voice tight. "Alexander," Robert replied, his voice softer than Alex had ever heard. Amina, sitting on the couch inside, glanced toward the door, her brow furrowing when she saw who it was. She didn't say a word, but Alex felt her presence, a steadying force, even now. "What do you want?" Alex asked, his expression guarded. Robert looked older, smaller somehow. His once flinty gaze was dulled by exhaustion. I came to talk." Alex didn't move. "About what?" Robert hesitated, glancing past Alex into the warm, inviting home behind him, a stark contrast to the empty mansion he'd come from. His gaze lingered on the family photos lining the hallway walls, Amina and Alex smiling with their children, their life full of joy and purpose. "You were right," Robert said finally. "I was wrong about her, about everything." Alex's face remained impassive, though a storm brewed behind his eyes. Robert cleared his throat, as though forcing the words out physically pained him. "She's the best thing that ever happened to you. I see that now." Silence hung between them, heavy and brittle. Alex's jaw tightened. "You don't get to say that now." "Son, please." Alex shook his head slowly. "You had every chance to be part of this life, to see her for who she is, to see us for what we are. You chose not to. And now that everything you built is gone, you want what's left of me?" Robert flinched, his shoulders sagging. I made mistakes." "You made choices," Alex corrected sharply, "and you have to live with them." For a moment, neither man moved. Robert seemed smaller than ever, just a tired old man standing in the rain. Finally, Alex stepped back and, with a quiet finality, shut the door. Amina watched as Alex walked back into the living room, his face unreadable. He sat beside her on the couch, silent for a moment, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth. "Are you okay?" Amina asked softly. Alex nodded slowly, reaching for her hand. "He regrets it. Do you?" Alex turned to her, his gaze softening. "Never." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Good." Robert Monroe Sr. returned to his empty estate, the echo of Alex's words ringing in his ears. Catherine sat in her favorite chair by the window, staring blankly at the gray skies outside. "They didn't need us," she said quietly, "and we lost them anyway." Robert sat heavily in his chair, staring at the flames in the fireplace. He said nothing. From their home, surrounded by love and laughter, Alex and Amina watched their children play. Their empire was not built on greed or control, but on compassion, progress, and love. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Alex asked quietly, watching the rain fall outside. "Maybe," Amina replied, "but it doesn't matter. We know who we are." Alex kissed her forehead, holding her close. "That's enough for me." Together they sat in the warmth of their home, unshaken by the storm that had passed. "Your presence here means so much. Thank you for being part of this story." To uncover more tales of hope, click the video to the left. And if you believe in the power of these narratives, hit subscribe and let's keep spreading light together. Until next time.